Today we're going to talk about boot verbs. Boot verbs are also known as stem changing verbs. The first thing that we're going to do is define what a stem is. For that, we're going to review a little bit of how verbs work in Spanish. Let's take a look. As you remember, all verbs in Spanish finish in either AR, ER, or IR. Let's see an example of them. In order to determine the stem of a verb, what we are going to do is we're going to remove the last two letters of the verb. In the case of estudiar, that is study, we're going to remove the AR. In the case of comer, we're going to remove the ER. And in the case of decir, we're going to remove the IR. Let's see how we do it. Whatever we have left is going to be the stem. In the case of estudiar, the stem is going to be up to here. In the case of comer, up to here. And in the case of decir, up to here. That is the stem, and when we conjugate the verbs, this is the part that we put before the ending. This part is going to change in the boot verbs or in the stem changing verbs. We're going to see how it's done. The first thing that we need to know is that there are three types of stem changing verbs or boot verbs. The first type is the one that changes an E to an IE. The second type changes the O to an UE. And the third type, which is only composed by one verb, changes the U to UE. We're going to work with some pattern verbs that are going to allow us to see how the boot verbs work. For an example of a verb that changes the E to IE, we're going to use cerrar, which means to close. For the category of verbs that change the O to UE, we're going to use the verb poder, that means can. And for the third category, the category that changes the U to UE, we're going to use the only verb in this category, which is jugar, to play. Now, we're going to focus on the first category, the category of verbs that change the E to IE. In order to conjugate these verbs, we have to remember that only certain personal pronouns are going to change the stem. The others are going to remain the same as in the original verb. Let's place the personal pronouns. I would like you to keep in mind that only these personal pronouns are going to change. And this is where this type of verb receive their name, because the shape of the personal pronouns creates some kind of a boot. I'll show you how. Some of my students like putting a heel or even some fumes coming out of the boot. But anyways, keep in mind that only these personal pronouns, yo, tú, él and ella, and ellos are going to change the stem. Let's see how. Notice how the E in the original verb is changing to IE in the conjugated form. The same is going to happen for tú, él and ella, and ellos. Now we're going to move to nosotros, and notice that the E on the infinitive on the original verb is not going to change. The same happens for vosotros. But in ellos, we're going to move back again to changing the E to IE. And that's how verbs, boot verbs, that change E to IE are conjugated. Now we're going to move to the second category, the one that changes the O to UE. The procedure is going to be the same, but I would like you to see it manually. Notice how only the yo, tú, él, ella, and ellos form have changed again. Nosotros and vosotros has remained the same. Finally, we're going to take a look at jugar, the verb that creates its own category and changes the U to UE. Let's take a look. By now, you should be able to determine why juego has changed, but jugamos hasn't changed. Think about it for a second. Was your answer that nosotros o vosotros are out of the boot? If that was the answer, that is correct. Only yo, tú, ella and ella, and ellos will change the you to UE. Let's make the boot. I would like to mention a couple of extra details that are going to be helpful in the future. I'm going to reduce the size of the verb jugar and we'll go into that. There are verbs that have several vowels, and we might not be sure which vowel is the one that is going to change. In order to address that, we're going to take a look at the verb recomendar. As you can see, it is not clear if we're going to be changing the first E, the second E, or the middle O. As a rule, the vowel that is going to change is the one that belongs to the syllable that is closest to the end after removing the AR, ER, or IR. Let's see what I mean. If I remove the AR, the vowel that is closest to the end is this E. And this E is the one that is going to change. Not the first E, not the first O, it's this E. And it's going to be obviously a change that is from E to IE. Let's see how the verb is conjugated. Notice that only this second E is changing to IE on the forms that we have already learned that are going to be modified. Yo, tú, él and ella, and ellos and ellas. Nosotros and vosotros still keeps the E originally from the verb. The second issue that I would like to mention is that the boot verbs are not identifiable by any kind of rule, so the only way to identify them is going to be learning them by heart. I'm going to give you a list of the boot verbs that I consider most important and that are used probably most frequently. Let's take a look at them. Let's look at the meaning of these verbs. Cerrar means to close. Jugar means to play. Now, empezar and comenzar mean exactly the same. They mean to start. So both of them mean to start. Pensar means to think. Recomendar means to recommend. Sentarse means to sit down. Almorzar means to have lunch. Contar means to tell or to count. So it could be used as I count the number of people in the room, cuento las personas en la habitación, or it could be to tell a story, cuento una historia. Costar means to cost, encontrar means to find, recordar means to remember, attention, not to record, to remember. Volar means to fly, perder means to lose, poder means can, entender means to understand. Querer has two meanings in English. One is to love, and the second one is to want. An example for the first meaning would be te quiero, I love you. An example for the second meaning, quiero un Ferrari, I want a Ferrari. Doler is to hurt. Por ejemplo, me duele la cabeza, I have a headache. Me duele el hombro, I have shoulder ache. Mover means to move. Volver means to return, to come back. Dormir means to sleep. Sentir means to feel. And preferir means to prefer. This is a basic list of the boot verbs that we're going to be using in class. They're not the only ones, but I consider that they are the most relevant ones that you should be learning. Last, I would like to mention that I have left outside this lecture a little group of verbs that are all IR verbs and change the E on their stem to I. Not to IE, but only to I. and they are all IR verbs. We'll address those verbs at a later lecture, but I want you to keep in mind that there are a few extra verbs that we haven't seen yet. And that's basically all for the boot verbs. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.